Hi, Hardeep. You are have a background in investment management. You have a background in venture capital and private equity, and you were mentored by James Caan, who many people may know was a dragon on Dragon's Den. You are the CEO and co-founder of the Kaleidoscope Group, which includes Kaleidoscope Investments. You launched the fund about 10 years ago now, I think, to invest and support disabled entrepreneurs. And your mission stems from a very personal journey. Tell us about Ishan.
Oh, thank you, Reena. Really lovely to see you, and thank you for enabling me to be on your show. So, yeah, Ishan is my son. He is 18 years old at the moment. He was born with a severe birthing complication, and at the last minute, he got a brain injury. So he got very, very badly brain damaged at birth. And so he changed the trajectory of my life completely, very, very unexpected. And especially as someone from an Asian background, we typically plan our children's lives. We think our lives are going to go in a certain way. Before our babies are born, we're planning who they're going to marry. And when this happened to Ishan, it completely changed my world, and it completely changed the way that I think and see everything, and also the way that I was treated as an Indian as well. As a human being, it's just we live in a very judgmental world. So I think Ishan has opened my eyes in many ways through his disability.
You talk about the judgment you faced. Was that from family, from friends, from a wider circle, from the Asian community, from everybody?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, first of all, it was from a sense of family, but I would say not the immediate family, the extended family. I think one of the challenges with disability is people don't know how to react. So sometimes when they're faced with somebody that's just had a child, it's not that they don't want to congratulate me, but they don't know whether they should congratulate me because they also know that I've got a child with a disability. So it was extended family, friends, friends sort of started to think I was bad luck. I was being cursed. Ishan was being cursed. And as a result, they didn't really want to be around us so much. And actually work colleagues as well. Even when I went back, I remember one day going back into my workplace after Ishan was born. And, there were a lot of people that didn't know what to say to me, right? Do we congratulate him? Do we commiserate him? Do we buy him a cake? Do we get him balloons? Or don't we? And so I think at that time when disability hits you, you're very, very sensitive in the first instance. And so you feel alienated by everybody, and so it's a very difficult journey. On the one hand, all your dreams and expectations and hopes are shattered because you don't know what's going to happen with the child that you've got in front of you. You're told some very negative things by the medical world, medical professional world, that are usually very sort of realistic in their own minds. So they're not that empathetic with the way they speak to you. So it's very difficult. And then on top of that, when you have people around you that are starting to sort of disassociate from you, or make you feel that you're being alienated, it becomes a very lonely place.
Come with so much pressure, not only the situation you find yourself in, but the support system you have, that must have changed. And if you have your colleagues or your wider family, those people who'd normally go to for support and lean on, if that's not intact, it must be a very pressurized situation, and it must have an impact on those relationships as well.
It did. And the biggest problem is, and this is a huge issue with disability, Rena, is that you cannot even begin to understand what it feels like if you do not have direct experience. It's just impossible. So I had so many people for a period of time that were actually trying to help me. They were parents of children. They would be like, we really understand how you feel.
But you don't.
No, you don't. In the nicest possible way, you haven't got a clue how I feel, right? And this is where you have to be a little bit empathetic because it's not their fault, right? And if they don't at least try and empathize with you or sympathize with you, then they're going to alienate you. So it's better to give it a go rather than not. And this is one of the things I would say now to people, in this world post-COVID, especially where we are surrounded by people with differences, health conditions, disabilities, is not to be afraid of approaching people, not to be afraid to ask. you know. And what's the worst thing that can happen if you say something that's a little bit wrong? At least that person knows that you made the effort to ask them rather than distance yourself and not make that effort in the first place.
Looking back, or what do you wish somebody had said? So you said colleagues didn't know what to say to you, people didn't know what to say to you. What would you have found comforting or frank, or what do you wish they would have done?
I wish people would have just almost treated me as they normally treated me. Okay. I wish people would have still said, "Hi, Hardy, how are you?" Okay, because I would have answered. I would have still said, "By the way, I'm fine. Obviously, I've been through a difficult experience right now." And I would have started to open up. But a lot of people didn't even do that, right? And they would just avoid or ignore because it was the easier way so to not feel awkward. So but that's what I would hope for. They don't need to highlight that, oh, this must be really difficult or it must be challenging. You don't need to even do that because in my mind, I would be thinking, well, how do you know? Do you have a parent? Are you a parent of a child? But just to be very natural, very normal, be warm, be human, right? Sometimes we forget with our egos in the world that we're in today, what it feels like to be human, right? Kind and humble. That's all you need to do when you're in a situation like this. And then let that other person begin to talk naturally. And then when they talk, you listen. Don't pretend to understand, right? But just listen and sort of be there for that individual. That's what I wish would have happened with me. And don't get me wrong, Rena, there were some people that did try to do that at the beginning. And like I said, with my immediate family, they were very supportive. They always have been. I'm very, very blessed with my immediate family. But some of the extended people that you don't know so well, they're the ones that I really struggled with.
It's opened up an entirely new world for you and it gave you insight into just the challenges that people face or some people face. That
Yeah, totally.
began your advocacy for entrepreneurship to be inclusive, diverse. So it was a background that you had and a reality that you lived. How did you get involved in Kaleidoscope Investments and the Kaleidoscope Group?
So one of the biggest lessons I learned through Ishin was, first of all, that once he was born with all his disabilities, my mindset was we'll spend all the money that we got and we'll reverse his brain damage. Okay, we think that. We often think when we got money we can do anything, right? One of the biggest challenges with disability is you can't do that, especially when you've got a damage to the brain. So one of the first things for me was that money can't reverse health conditions. That was very big learning for me. And the second thing I learned through Ishan is despite the list of things that he is unable to do, okay, so he's registered blind, he's fully dependent, he's peg fed, so he's got a gastro, he's fed that way. He's not able to talk, so he can't express how he communicates. He's got the most amazing smile, as you know, right, as you've seen, and he's an incredible kid when he presents himself as a happy child. But one of the biggest things I realized through Ishin is that there's still so much you can take away from him, despite the fact that he's not able to communicate in the way that most other people would communicate. Most of us in the world today think communication is just via speech. What I learned through Ishin is it's not. Right, communication can be different, and that kind of got me very curious about disability. And then I met my partner about 10 years ago, Shane Bradby, and he explained to me that a lot of people with disabilities, they are judged. They are not given fair chances. They are not given fair opportunities. And yet so many of them have amazing business ideas. And so I thought to myself, well, I've been in this world of investment. As you said, I worked with James Kahn, which was a phenomenal experience. And I learned so much about investing and then helping businesses to grow when I worked with him as well. And that made me suddenly realize that backdrop that actually, why don't we set up a company that just invests in people with disabilities and not just invest, but mentor them to help them to really grow their businesses and give them that hope and faith that actually there is somebody that's there that can listen to you and give you that opportunity. And that was actually the premise that Kaleidoscope Investment started on. So we thought, right, we're just going to focus on the disability community and give them that voice. And even till today, Reena, 10 years later, some of my best friends now are all people that are disabled. I've met over 1,000 people with disabilities across 65 different types of disabilities. So I've really absorbed myself into their world. And to be honest with you, it's an incredible world. It's a world like most people wouldn't even get to see the inside of if you're not a part of it. So everything I do with Kaleidoscope now is it's linked to either investment, which is helping people with disabilities to start their own companies, or recruitment, which is helping people with disabilities to find employment. And it's not just about doing the right thing. Okay. Actually, everyone can make money, right? If investors invest in disabled people, they can make money. If employers recruit disabled people, those people with disabilities will help them to make money, right? So actually, there is a commercial element to this that's a win-win for everybody. But the biggest struggle, Reena, is actually getting the world to see it in that way, because at the moment, a lot of people don't.
So the word disability covers a myriad of situations, spectrums. I guess that would be your first challenge. And how does somebody
Yeah.
who may have a different ability or a disability, or how do they have to, do you need to be better or more intuitive to make sure that you can find out what they want to do and help them to uncover that gem of an idea that they have? And what are some of the misconceptions that people generally have, and maybe you've had when you started this venture?
Well, unfortunately, before I started this venture, actually before Ishin, I was so ignorant to the world of disability. It's unbelievable, Rena. I think for me, it was just a blue badge and a parking bay. That's literally all I knew about disability. For almost 35 years, I was completely shielded. So that's why I'm very, very patient and empathetic with people that don't understand disability, because I was one of them. And I think that um, I encourage people with disabilities to be very open about them. And you referred to lots of different myriads of disabilities. To me, we cover everything, right? From visible disabilities, physical disabilities, hidden disabilities, neurodiversity, sensory disabilities, you name it. People that could look like they haven't got any disability whatsoever versus someone like Ishan that is very visibly obvious they're disabled. So it's across the board. I think nowadays people tend to be more open about saying they are disabled than they used to be. Okay. And I think some of the Western culture and Western society is more open to disability. I think our world, the sort of the Indian world, the Asian world, the Middle Eastern world, they still have a long way to go to accept disability, but they are getting better. I do want to acknowledge that. Okay. So
Think
I
it's
think the
more
world is
so,
getting better.
more
Sorry.
so. Do you think that that exists more so in the Asian world or the ethnic minority world?
That's a very good question. I think the reason I think it's making it a change is because in India in particular, there are some really good entrepreneurs that are doing some great things with disability, right? And that's getting profile. That's getting profile. And so therefore, when people start thinking that, oh, actually I can make money out of that, right? It starts getting a bit more attention. There is a very fine line because sometimes people that are disabled are seen to be charitable, right? And so investors may not want to make money out of charity, right? And there is this kind of you've got to be careful to tread the line carefully there. But there are some people that are very, very capable. And so those are the people that become role models and can start to change perceptions, right? And that's I think is what we need more in our Asian community, is I think on the personal level, we need to stop being judgmental, right? As a race, I think we are, sorry to say this, it's just my honest opinion. I think we can be very, very judgmental on other people, on other families. And that's a very harsh thing to do, because today you are where you are and tomorrow you may not be, right? And so things can change as well very, very quickly. So on a personal level, I think it's really important. On a professional level, I think that because of the capitalistic society and world we live in, everything is driven by money, right? And if people are not giving people an opportunity, um, either they're doing it because it's charity, or they're not doing it at all because they think they can't make money from it. And I think one of the things that Kaleidoscope is trying to prove is that people with disabilities are very capable, very capable. if you give them that opportunity. So there's a huge thing about perception. And, what you said about sort of me trying to understand them and reading through them and sort of seeing what their disability may be. Yes, I can do that to a good extent, especially if they have a sort of a hidden disability. I've become quite attuned to that over the last 10 years. But at the same time, Reena, one of the things I do very often is speak openly, as you well know, about Ishin very, very quickly in my conversations. And I talk about my own disability, having gone through postnatal depression, mental health, honestly speaking, suicidal thoughts in the early years when Ishin was born. These are not things that the Asians usually talk about, particularly men. Right. So when all of a sudden you do begin to do that, then what you'll find is that other people start to do that too. Right. Invariably, I'll have someone else that will say, oh, actually, now that you said that, I've got a cousin that's got this, or I've got a cousin, but they won't start with it. Right. So I think one of the things that I do in trying to be an advocate is lead by example. So show them that I've had this great career, I've done these amazing things. I'm also doing this now, and I'm also a dad. I'm a father. I have a son that I love to death, right? And yes, he's disabled, and yes, he's different, but I have got to the point that I don't actually see him as different. I really don't, right? So when I
Question.
push him down the street and he's in a wheelchair, I don't see that wheelchair arena as any different from a pram. And I really mean that. I really mean that when I say that. It's taken me a long time to get there, but in my mind, he is absolutely the way he's meant to be.
So I've got two questions that stem from that. How did you get to that place where you don't see it that being any different? That's my first question. And when we talk about business and making money, yes, most businesses want to make money, and that's a massive part of what they do, why they do what they do. But surely it's about having a diverse representation on any board or panel. The reasons we want to do that is that people see the world in a different way. They see opportunities, they see challenges, and we all don't see the world differently. And when we bring all those voices to the table, the view that we get is so much, the horizon we see is so much larger, and the
Yeah.
opportunities and the things that haven't been fixed, the opportunities that we haven't yet taken advantage of, they also become apparent for companies.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Those are two very big questions. So I'll start with the
We've got a
first one.
third very big question, which was just about the Asian community. And do we see it as a disability and not a different ability? We grow up not knowing or not having the insight, those great role models who may be differently abled to look at and say, look what they've achieved, because those people don't always get the opportunity to break free from their disability that somebody may have labeled them with.
So,
And
yeah.
yeah, I've got lots of questions. And the other last question, and then you pick the ones you want, is when I talk to you about, do you read people or see people make the best of themselves? Because I wonder if you've grown up in a world where there's lots of no's or what you can't do. And sometimes then you don't have the confidence to say, well, I actually can do this.
Yeah.
There's
So
four
what
questions.
I'm going to try and remember all of those. I hope you do, but I'll try. I think I'll go backwards. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the knacks that I have picked up, okay, is that I have an ability to be able to meet a person and then figure out what it is that they should be doing in their lives, right? What is their purpose? What is their meaning? What is their mission? What is their talent? And therefore, what should they do? Right. So right now, when I train people with disabilities to find employment, I'm able to do that. Right. And I think that's come from just a journey of being interested in people and making sure that they want to benefit, making sure that they should benefit from doing something very meaningful in their lives. Okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is when it comes to our parents, right? Or that generational mindset and thought process around disability. There's a horrible word called handicapped, and we don't really talk about it anymore. But our parents, our generation of parents, do. They've spoken about that word a lot, and actually through their judgment, and I want to call it unconscious judgment. I'm not saying that they judge people to be rude or to be harsh, but it's passed down, right? I mean, I still remember lots of things my dad said to me about disability, unintentionally, but that was probably what he believed in his world, right? So people with disabilities have historically been seen as people that are challenging, that are hard work, that needs additional support, that are not capable, and quite a few of them need additional support. It's true, right? And some of them may not be that capable, but with help nowadays in the world that we live in, they are. Right? Technology has advanced in so many ways that somebody 10 years ago that couldn't speak can now speak, right? Look at what Elon Musk is doing. He's trying to make blind people see. He's trying to make people that couldn't walk, right? So technology is changing the way that people can do things. So I think there is a generational mindset that we've all had embedded in us that has created an unconscious bias in the way that we think. And half the time when we're judging other people, we probably didn't even realize we're judging other people, Rena. We're just doing it by default, right? It's becoming a mindset. So actually reprogramming our minds is very important. And then your question around diversity and inclusion, I mean, that's a huge topic. And I think that diversity and inclusion is very good. I'm a huge supporter of diversity and inclusion and all the pillars. Okay, I'm talking about all of them, not just disability. Disability has always been seen as the poor pillar out of all diversity, when it comes to gender, race, etc. Disability is always at the bottom. But the thing that we do have to be very careful about, though, is that the D&I argument can go the other way, where we are doing too much just to be diverse and inclusive. And as a result, we're not getting the right people to do the right jobs. And I've witnessed that. Okay, so in my background in the corporate world, in the SME world, small to medium sized enterprises, sometimes people can get a little bit carried away by diversity and inclusion, and they can go the opposite way. Right. So I think what you have to do is find a balance that's in the middle. So yes, diverse boards, critically important, critically important. And there's hardly any people with disabilities on big company boards. I think there was a study done recently for the FTSE 100, and there was about 4 people with disabilities that were on boards. 4. Right. So there's absolutely an argument for diversity and inclusion, but I think we do need to make sure that we are still recruiting the people with the right skill set, because I've witnessed cases where we're not actually doing that. We're trying to hit a target, we're trying to hit a goal, and then we're getting the wrong kind of person, but because they suit a certain kind of demographic. But obviously, I'm a huge D&I fan, right? And that is still the case, even though I know in America they've kind of changed their policy, and I know it is actually filtering down into some companies in the UK as well. But nevertheless, it's very important. And the final point about my journey is that for the first 8 to 10 years, Reena, it was very, very difficult. Very difficult. I went through a divorce at that time as well. And the divorce was not Ishan's fault. I would say that my marriage wasn't the strongest marriage even before, but having a disability doesn't help, right? And it's definitely contributed to that. But what really changed my perspective was I had a girlfriend that was a Christian, actually, and she introduced me to Christianity. And for the first time in my life, Reena, instead of me looking at Ishan in a way that everybody else was trying to tell me, which is his punishment, he's being punished, he was reincarnated this way because he was a bad human being before, all this kind of negative rhetoric, all of a sudden it was, wow, this kid he's the way he's meant to be. He's being born the way he's meant to be. Actually, he is perfect, right? And the funny thing is, in the eyes of God, whatever religion you are, Ishan and children like Ishan that are disabled don't have a capability to sin. They don't have the ability to sin. So actually, they might have imperfect bodies, but they have purer souls and spirits than the rest of us, right? And I love looking at Ishan that way. And in fact, although I'm Ishan's dad, he's my teacher. He is my teacher. I learn from him, right? Sometimes when I'm with him and where, there is no noise and it's completely silent and I'm just looking into his eyes, I feel something that is so inexplicable, Rena. It's like a communication on a non-verbal level. It's like soul communication. It's very difficult to explain, but you really feel a sense of something from children like Ishin, that aren't capable of harming other people, that aren't capable of even thinking bad thoughts. That is what changed me. That suddenly gave me the ability to think, wow, I'm blessed to be this kid's father. I'm actually blessed, right? I'm now being taken on a journey that Ishin is taking me on. With what I'm doing with Kaleidoscope, it's driven by him. It's driven by him 100%. He is my drive and my motivation, and the good Lord, of course, right? But that's how I turned my life around, Rena, because beforehand it was very difficult. Now I don't care who judges me, who says what, I am content, right? Because nobody's walking in my shoes, nobody's walking in Ishin's shoes. I've got a journey, I've got a goal. I know the legacy that I want to leave for him and me and others. That's the whole point. Our life now is about legacy. It's like, what can we do to change the landscape for disability for years and decades to come? Sorry, I think that was all the four questions you asked.
I think they were, but tell me a story about one of your entrepreneurs and something remarkable that has touched you or something that they've
One,
built.
one of the entrepreneurs that I really love actually is a lady called Tarita, who has a business called Travel for All, and she's got multiple sclerosis. And multiple sclerosis is a degenerative disease. So it might present a bit like cerebral palsy, but usually cerebral palsy is a constant, whereas multiple sclerosis is declining. And this woman, basically, her business helps people with disabilities to travel, okay? Because people with disabilities love traveling the world. And what I have realized through her is the definition of grit, determination, and unwavering commitment to making a business work. Unbelievable, Rena, unbelievable. She's helped so many hundreds of people have beautiful holiday experiences because a lot of people with disabilities don't get to travel, believe it or not. Right, they don't get it, or they get to travel probably in the UK. It's very rare that they go overseas. But I think that even now, her speech has become quite impaired. Her health is significantly deteriorated. But her commitment to the business, her commitment to the shareholders, her commitment to her clients and customers is just remarkable. And sometimes I think to myself, I wish entrepreneurs could see the level or the extent of what disabled people go to actually get their messages across and how hard they work. Because a lot of people with disabilities have to work 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as hard as people that aren't disabled just to achieve the same thing. So she's always really touched my heart.
Sounds wonderful. When you invest in companies, do you look at different things now when you come to it, if you have a disabled entrepreneur to when you were investing in your previous life?
Yeah, that's a very good question because actually I was in the startup world before Kaleidoscope and the startup world with. So I was saying to someone the other day, I've probably seen 3,500 startup ideas over time. And there are differences. There are differences. I think now I wouldn't be as quick to invest in a person with a disability as I might be with a person that hasn't got a disability, depending on their disability. Okay. And that is because sometimes you have to really understand a person with a disability better. Right. So I like to get to know them for 6 to 9 months. Right. And I say that because from experience, from personal experience, see, I have witnessed a lot of people that have changed. Sometimes their disabilities make them change their opinions or make them change in a certain way you may not have expected them to do, and they may not have expected themselves to do, right? And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, right? So sometimes you have to take longer to understand the person, the individual you're dealing with. I also tend to try and make sure that when it comes to people with disabilities, there is also another person in the business as well to help support them. So invariably, if their health takes a turn for the worse, or they need to take time off, or they may have more appointments, it's always good to have another person in the business that can also, take over and take charge and help. with that person when their health isn't as strong as it could be. But and then the third thing is a lot of the time you look at the ideas, right? But I think with people with disabilities, I look at them. I really study them. I really understand how well they know what they're doing. And I also see, Rena, it's a very interesting question because I'm thinking of the answer as I go along, is that
Surely
I
you would do
also
that
see
for any business that you invest in.
not all the time, not all the time, because again, a lot of these individuals with disabilities, they are multifaceted and they are multi-talented, especially when you're dealing with people on the neurodiverse spectrum, or those that might have ADHD, or even those that have got autism. Typically, they're like the Elon Musks, right? They haven't just got one idea, they've got 15 ideas, right? So, suddenly it's a challenge of like, actually, how do I figure out which is the right one to focus on? Because they're going to convince me that all 15 are brilliant. You know what I mean? So it definitely is more challenging, and it's not as straightforward. And funnily enough, I was actually talking to the FCA just recently about putting some additional measures in when investing in disabled people, because it's also very easy, Rena, to take advantage of them. Right? A lot of people with disabilities have spent decades trying to raise money. Decades. In my research, the average person that approached me have been trying to look for money for about 11 years. 11 years, right? So when they suddenly find someone that's listening to them, they'll give you everything. They're like, I don't care how much equity I give you. I don't care what it is. I just need 100 grand. And if you're going to listen to me, then you can take my whole company. And I'm not kidding. If I was unscrupulous, I could take huge shares in startup businesses, huge. Right. And that's very dangerous. That's very dangerous. So we have to make sure we've got a framework where when you are investing in people with disabilities, especially those with mental health challenges that are susceptible to being, taken advantage of or more vulnerable, you don't want unscrupulous investors around those sorts of people. So that's what I would say to that.
Tell us about Kaleidoscope Ventures. What do you think you would like? What would you like us to know?
Well, my
Investments.
my goal is to set up our own fund of £100 million, first of its kind fund that will just invest in people with disabilities globally, but also that will invest in people with disabilities that are coming up with ideas to serve the disabled community. Right. And I'm saying that still from the perspective of making money, but the disabled community are so underrepresented in what they need and what they want, and yet they have a lot of money, right? So I actually want these people with disabilities to create products and services for that community and beyond. I'm not saying you shouldn't consider people without that, but and beyond is very important. So I think, I'd love to get the message out there that people that interact with people that are disabled or mix with them should understand that those individuals are human beings. They should be given the same opportunities that anybody else should be given. They shouldn't be judged, and they should be treated like people that are able to perform and deliver good results, right? Just like anyone else. So that would be a very important message for me.
Thank you very much for talking to us about Ishan and Kaleidoscope Investments, Hardeep.